Good evening and welcome. I'm Sheila Balgobin and I am the Dream Decipherer, and I help you to sleep sound and dream deep. This evening I've got a bumper crop of dreams today from two dreamers, but four dreamlets, as I call them, four short dreams from one dreamer, and one dreamer who happens to be a lady. Ladies, I know you're out there and I know you're dreaming. Your anonymity will be protected, so please, if you have a dream, do send it in. As it happens, this dream is from a lady who took my dream interpretation course a year ago. And it's always interesting to revisit a dream because you can still learn things from it. And even up to a few minutes before this broadcast, I was looking at this dream and still pulling information out of it. So having a perspective of time, more experience can make a difference in how you look at a dream and the information that you can get out of it, even after a period of time has passed. So we're going to get right into it. This first dream talks about, looks at time and integrating time and experience. The dream came to me in as a few paragraphs, actually, so as a story, and I'm going to read it just as I received it. So the dreamer says that she's in a big room and she sees herself pacing close to a very big window. I get the sense, the dreamer is saying, I'm not in England. The room is sparse. There's a bed on which there's a youngish, good-looking black man lying on the bed and a beautiful young black girl sitting next to him, talking to him. The man is ill, but he has penetrating blue or gray eyes. One gets the sense that he's a very old soul and that he's a very intelligent and wise person. I notice that he's constantly looking at me as I pace around the world, but I also notice that he is blind. The gentleman and the young girl are talking about religious stuff, and the girl says to him that she, the dreamer, doesn't believe in God. And the dreamer gets the sense that the man is a priest. The dreamer counteracts the girl's statement by saying that I do believe in God, but not in a way that is traditional. And she tells the man that I've spoken with God and I know that God exists, but not in the same way as people think. And she tells him her God story. The man replies to the dreamer, I have no doubt you spoke with God, but just as you are an expert in your field, you are not an expert in theosophy, which is the study of God, and that these two areas are quite different in nature. The man then tells a story of him talking from a pulpit in a church, and he sees a young girl in the congregation watching him. It appears that the girl is looking at him and wants something from him, and he keeps looking at her, the girl that is, intently, trying to decipher the message, but the girl runs away. The man finds the girl later in a bar, sitting on a bench, waiting for him. He realizes that she's blind, but she is able to see him like a sighted person, meaning that her eyes would follow him as he moved around. He sits down and asks the girl what she wants. She tells him she wants him to do something for her, but the dreamer wasn't sure what it was the girl wanted, and before the man could even reply, the girl takes off again. Finds the girl later in a house, and she had asked the man to cut something out from her body. He doesn't really want to do it, but he does it anyway. The dreamer says she sees blood on his fingers, but not what he cut out of the girl. The scene changes, she says, but she never gets to find out what had been cut out, even though she was curious about it. And finally, the man tells yet another story about a young black man who also could see the way this girl could, even though he was blind. He could sense and move his head to turn with people's movements. All of a sudden, the dreamer says she sees a young black man in the wilderness, in the bush, in what appears to be Africa. It's spring or summertime. The grass is green and light brown, and it's normal summer grass with small acacia trees in leaf, which were pale apple green. The young man is standing on a path, deciding on which way to go. He's not fearful. He's just making a decision. What is so special about him, the dreamer says, is that he appears to have been a time traveler. He could see different realities happening all at once. That is, past, present, and future. He could see and have a perspective on all three at the same time. Now, this dream is so rich in imagery that even looking at it again a year later, there's still information I've been able to pull out of it and gain some new insights from. And I'm hope that these newer insights will stimulate even more thought and hopefully growth feeds back to me. So let's start from the beginning. There's this black man and a young black girl, both considered to be very attractive or good looking. Now, they seem to be African, but it's not stated. But there's something about the fact that even though this man was black, he had light or gray or blue eyes. So there's this contrast about darkness and the unknown, and the implications that Africa was the dark continent, the unknown country, etc. But yet this place was full of light. This man was full of light. You could also look at it as the eyes being the window to the soul, so to speak. So maybe that though the appearance was dark, the eyes were full of light. Now, there's also something about who is this man. The dreamer identifies him possibly as being a priest. He makes reference to speaking in the pulpit so that it seems to reinforce that idea. But you have to understand the context of the dream. There's always a context that the dream must be understood in. And in this particular case, the dreamer said she felt she was someplace not in England, but the dreamer actually does live in England. But I have to add to that she lives in England, but she was born and raised in Africa, of English parents, but born and raised in Africa. So there's something about polarities, and maybe not so much race as is black and white, but polarities in terms of light and shadow, or things that are seen and things that are not seen. So that's something to keep in mind. And as I said, it's all about context. The dreamer did say that the things about aspects of the dream did remind her of growing up in Africa. Now, you could think of this dream at first glance. I mean, why is she dreaming about black people as opposed to her own people? And there's something about being separate from the tribe. The dreamer has already indicated that, saying she had her own set of beliefs that were different from what other people believed. The story that the priest told about the little girl in the church, again, seeming to ask some kind of question, but not articulating what the question was. So there's something about being part of a group and being separate from it at the same time. So perhaps there's something there for the dreamer in terms of groupthink, in terms of tribal think, what her tribe is supposed to be like, as opposed to going her own way. So there may have been, in actuality, perhaps some conflict in childhood teachings with that, in conflict with the person that the dreamer is now. Now, it's interesting that among these little vignettes that the man was telling, that the girl keeps running away. She's looking for something, she wants something, but she keeps running away. When finally, at the third try, the man finds this girl. She had asked them to remove something from her. Doesn't specify what it is, where it is, or how that was supposed to be done. And reluctantly, the man carries out her request and removes whatever it is. The dreamer doesn't know what it is, though she was curious as to what was removed. Now, there's something about the unseen here. What happens, the actual removal is done off stage, if you will, or out of sight, so that there's the implication that whatever is being removed is being done at an unseen or unconscious, perhaps, level. And there's also the possibility that another way was found. The dreamer, in essence, didn't witness this removal, and maybe that points to that there was, rather than this removal, despite the bloody hands. Now, there's color is always important in dreams, whether what colors or if there is color at all. And it's interesting that the colors that were described were earthy tones, very grounding tones. Green, which is the color of nature and is also a color of balance, and light brown, color of the earth, which indicates a more steady and grounded nature. Then there was the pale apple green of acacia buds. Now, pale green, if you think about hospitals, especially in children's wards, pale green is considered a very, very restful color. That's why they used to have what they call the green room on television stages, backstage, because green was considered very restful for the eyes. But there's interesting about this acacia tree that I got buds indicating new life, but acacias also have hellish thorns, wicked thorns, like this big thorns. So that even with its beauty, it defends itself. It keeps itself intact, or as much as it can, against marauding giraffes and what have you. But there's the implication is that it can defend itself and protect itself against predators of some kind. Now, another area that is of interest is this blindness, this theme of blindness that runs through this dream. Now, there was originally the man who was lying in the bed at the beginning of the dream, who the priest, if for lack of a better name, who had blue or gray eyes, very light colored eyes, but yet was blind, but had spiritual insight. Then you had the young girl who kept running away, who also seemed to have sight, yet was blind. Then you had this young man, a young black man, who, the time traveler, we'll call him, who was also able to see, though he was blind. And there's something very interesting about seeing with our physical eyes and seeing with our spiritual eyes. And there's obviously a conflict there going on between the spiritual vision, if you will, and the ordinary, vision that we see with things with our eyes. So there is appears to be some kind of integration going on here. We're trying to integrate past experience, past teachings with the adult, the woman that is the dreamer today. And it's interesting that during this dream, the there are represented. There were girls. They're young women or girls, but they're not fully adult. As if there was still there psychologically, there's still some growing to do. Now, when women dream of women or girls in their dreams, it usually, not always, but usually represents the shadow, the parts of us that need to be worked on, to need to have a light shine onto them so that we can look at them and develop those areas of ourselves. So that it's interesting that there was a young black girl and a young white girl. And again, that's the known and the unknown. We can't look at it necessarily in terms of race, but in terms of polarity, the opposites. There's a part of the dreamer that is known, and there's still a part that is unknown. And even the priest refers to that there are still things that this dreamer did not know. Now, they're interesting that the dreamer found herself in a room. She wasn't sure where, not in England, not in Africa, but that it had a large window. So a large window so that she could see out, but could people see in as well? There's something about visibility or lack of visibility that is also could be of interest. Now, and place. There's an unidentified place, then various places, and then finally Africa. And so there's a progression that there was a time out of place, and then a gradually of kind of moving back to the past, but from a different perspective, from the present, and possibly being able to carry that somehow into the future with a greater understanding. Like I said, this was a dream very, very rich in imagery, and even a year later, was able to pull out more information out of that dream from the time that the dreamer and I worked on it. So, dreamer, thank you for giving permission to share that dream. And I hope the additional insights will stimulate, as I said, some new thoughts and new insights, and hopefully some growth in some interesting directions. Now, these next sets of dreams, because it's 4 short dreams, or dreamlets as I call them, and they seem to have things to do with travel, but we'll look at that as we go along. The first dream, the dreamer arrived on foot at the house of an old friend, and was waiting for the friend to arrive and to talk about throwing a party. The friend had a female flatmate, and the dreamer and the female flatmate, found that they were very attracted to each other, and things kind of developed from there. How they developed, don't know. Dreamer doesn't say. Now, that I think it'd be helpful to take each little, read through all the dreams and then work through them, being that they all did come back to back. They are related in some way, but we'll have to wait and see what the relationship is. So that was the first dream. He arrived at this place on foot. Now, the second dream, the dreamer was sitting on the back seat on the lower deck of a double-decker, and a young man got onto the bus, sat down opposite him, and then robbed him at gunpoint. So that's dream number 2, sitting in the back of the lower deck of a bus, when someone sits opposite him and then robs him at gunpoint. The third dream, the dreamer was sitting. There's no traveling at all. He's sitting in a row of seats, waiting for an event to start. And while he's waiting for the event to start, he's looking at some porn. I assume on his phone or tablet or something. There was a woman sitting next to him and saw what he was looking at and asked him if he wanted to be put into chastity. I guess a chastity belt, or placed on a naughty step some kind of way, to get him in a more chaste state. Then the fourth dream, which I found interesting, shades of politics here. The dreamer was working for Boris Johnson, the current prime minister, who had just lost the election. Now, this was quite interesting. He had just lost the election, but was refusing to concede. So the dreamer said that he stated he was going outside to talk to the press and make a statement. And now, in this dream, he was trying to leave or went to leave and gets fired. Now, like I said, travel or lack of it is interesting, and traveling in our dreams often has to do with our journey through life. So sometimes we're walking, sometimes we're flying, sometimes we're driving, or somebody's driving us. So transportation, just in a broader sense, represents our journey through life, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. So in dream number one, the dreamer arrives on foot, and he is attracted to and becomes involved with supposedly his male friend's female flatmate. Now, I just wonder, is that something that may or may not have happened in real life? Not sure. The second dream takes place in the lower deck of a double-decker bus, in the back of the bus. And buses, at least in my own dreams I have found, or dreams of people that I've worked with over the years, represents a more pedestrian or more common way of travel. So it's the people's way of traveling. During this trip, the dreamer was robbed at gunpoint, which is a very violent, very masculine aggression. I mean, think of, guns are like the ultimate in masculinity, and felt very threatened, as you would imagine. Now, there's something interesting about, being in the lower deck of the bus rather than the upper deck. I mean, you think of the unconscious uses metaphor to make a point, and there's something about violent passion in terms of this robbery, this armed robbery, but lower. Somehow it's lower. It's not in the upper deck. It's in the lower deck. So there's something lower about it. Something can't quite put my finger on it at the moment, but there's something about being in a lower place or a lower level, functioning at a lower level. Now, this aggressor, the young man who robbed the dreamer, was sat opposite the dreamer. Now, it's something about being face to face with something or someone, and there's either to confront or to capitulate here. There doesn't seem to be any middle ground. It's either fight or flight, it would seem. And again, there's something when a person dreams about a person of the same sex, whether they're friendly or not in the context, it could represent the shadow, the inner part of them that is not acknowledged, not as developed, needs to be worked on some more. So who was that young man that sat down? What was he wearing? What was he doing? Did he say anything? Um, why did he just decide? I mean, was the bus empty? Was it, and the dreamer was all alone, and this young man just sat down in front of him? There perhaps it needs to think about a little bit more about the context of what happened during this assault, because there may be more clues as to what or who this young man actually represents. In the third dream, the dreamer was sitting at an event, so there was no movement as such. He was stationary. Um, Now, what kind of event, he didn't say. And he was watching porn. Why? When you think about people watching porn, they generally don't watch it in public. It's something that people do in private. So it's an interesting contrast to do something that you would normally do in private in public. And why is that? What was that? What does that represent? What does that mean? And, defying the rules in some way. The There was also, I mean, it might be sound minor, but it even, in terms of porn, what was being watched? What was the dreamer actually watching? Again, symbols are used, and they're very particular and very specific. So it would be perhaps something for the dreamer to think about. What was the dreamer actually watching when they were watching this porn? What was that about? And the woman looking over, kind of asking, did the dreamer want to be put into chastity? Now, remember that when women appear in the dream of a man, that's usually the anima, the inner female, or that which corresponds to the animus or inner male in women. Now, that is the, if you will, the more feeling side, the more emotional side of the man, the inner part of him. And it's interesting that she asks a question and he doesn't answer. He just kind of ignores her, and the dream ends at that point. But there's a particular lack of movement when you compare to the first two dreams. Now, the fourth dream I thought was really quite interesting. And, maybe there's a bit of a smokestack going on there with current politics being what they are, that Boris Johnson actually appeared in the dreamer's dream. But in any case, in this last dream, he's working for a politician. Now, I don't know what the dreamer's thoughts are, particularly about politics and politicians, but I suspect that there may be something around the areas of that being truthful versus not being truthful. And despite the dream, Boris Johnson has not lost an election, at least not yet. So I wonder how much of that is just smokestack stuff. I mean, burning stuff off from the day-to-day subspace chatter on the news with the prime minister, or what does Boris Johnson actually represent for the dreamer? Yes, he's a politician. Yes, he's the prime minister. But what does he represent for the dreamer? And that is probably where the significance of why he appeared in this dream will become more apparent. Now, it's interesting that in this dream, Boris Johnson refuses to concede a loss of an election. Now, there's something about being not seeing reality, perhaps being stubborn in a particular point of view, not being willing to accept reality, perhaps. There's something about that when the dreamer goes to say, hey, this isn't right. I'm going to tell the truth. He gets fired. When he tries to move out of the situation, he gets fired. Or you could put it a different way, he gets burned. Where perhaps in life, in waking life, has the movement or speech or speaking up may have gotten the dreamer fired or in trouble or in difficulty in some way? Is there something related to waking life there or not? Or is maybe there's just something regarding politics and politicians that's got the dreamer fired up? Don't know. Again, as I said, the unconscious mind is very clever. It uses metaphors, it uses plays on words, all kinds of ways to get our attention. And maybe there's something about being fired, and politicians or politics that the dreamer may want to look at. So there you have it. That was truly a marathon session with dreams, and I thank both my dreamers for allowing me to share their dreams. I really appreciate that. And if you have a dream that you would really like help with, don't be shy. You can drop me the details of your dream by a messenger by 12 noon on Thursdays, and I will be happy to go through the dream and share some tips anonymously live on Thursday evening. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Have a fantastic evening and rest of the week, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.